Chica, my clothes are getting old. I need new ones.
Let me go and ask Mama.
Ask Mama about my clothes.
Mama said no. She said the ones you have are still fine.
Oh, Chica, I need money for the market. There are things we lack.
Wait, let me ask Mama. Mama said no. She said you can manage what is
About to sell the house.
Why are you making it sound bad? Mama only wants what is best.
Mama said no. Those 3 words landed like a slap, sharp and humiliating, echoing inside Amarachi's chest as if the walls themselves were mocking her. She stood still, fingers tightening around the edge of her wrapper, eyes searching her husband's face for even a trace of shame, but Chika only shrugged lightly, as though he had delivered good news. You heard me, he added casually. Mama said it is not necessary. That was the highest peak of her silent suffering, the moment she realized she was married to a man whose decisions did not belong to him. It had started so simply. That morning, with softness in her voice, she had said, "Chica, my clothes are getting old. I need new ones." He did not answer her directly. He did not consider it. He did not even pause. Instead, he stood up immediately. "Let me go and ask Mama." Amarachi blinked slowly. "Ask Mama about my clothes." But he was already halfway out, sandals slapping against the ground as he hurried to his mother's hut like a messenger carrying urgent news. She waited. The air felt heavy. Moments later, he returned. Mama said no. She said the ones you have are still fine. Amarachi forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh," she replied quietly. Inside her, something small and fragile cracked, but she swallowed it. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself love required patience. Days later came the market incident, the moment that sealed the wound deeper. She approached him gently again. "Chica, I need money for the market. There are things we lack." He did not even look at her properly. "Wait," he said quickly, already turning away. "Let me ask Mama." Her heart sank before he even stepped outside. She could hear the faint murmur of voices from his mother's hut, his tone eager, hers firm. Then he returned. "Come." Unbothered. "Mama said no," he announced. "She said you can manage what is in the house." Amarachi stared at him, disbelief washing over her face. "Chica," she whispered carefully, "am I your wife, or am I asking your mother for permission to breathe?" He frowned slightly, confused by her tone. "Why are you making it sound bad?" "Mama only wants what is best." Amarachi nodded slowly, but her chest burned. In that moment, standing in her own husband's house, she felt like a visitor waiting for approval to exist. The walls seemed unfamiliar. The air felt borrowed. The love she once celebrated now felt supervised. She swallowed her heart again because that was what strong women did, they swallowed pain until it either hardened them or broke them. And before we continue this life lesson story, kindly subscribe to support this channel. Now sit back as I take you through this powerful story. Amarachi was the pride of her father, Izudu, and her mother, Neka, the kind of daughter elders pointed at during gatherings and said, that one was raised well. From childhood, she carried herself like someone who understood that her name was a family's honor. Her skin glowed like fresh palm oil poured under the sun, smooth and radiant, and her eyes were steady like the river at dawn, calm on the surface, deep with quiet strength beneath. When she walked through the compound, she did not rush, she did not sway carelessly, she moved with dignity, greeting every elder with a gentle bend of her knees. "Good morning, Papa," she would say softly. "Good evening, Mama," her voice warm like evening firewood. She woke before the cock crowed, tying her wrapper firmly around her waist, sweeping the compound while the sky was still grey with sleep. The sound of her grinding stone was often the first sign that morning had truly begun. She cooked without complaint, farmed without laziness, traded without dishonesty. Women admired her discipline, whispering to one another, "If my son brings this one home, I will rest." Men, both young and grown, secretly prayed in their hearts, let her look at me just once. Yet Amarachi never carried pride on her head, she laughed easily, her smile bright and sincere, speaking gently even when others were harsh. Izudo would watch her sometimes and say quietly to Neka, "This daughter of ours is worth more than gold." Neka would nod with satisfaction. She would build a home wherever she goes. In another household lived Chika, the only son among 4 daughters, Adis, Obianuju, Chidinma, and Somto, the last child and the center of attention in a house full of women. His mother, Mama Uchechi, loved him with a devotion that almost felt sacred, while his father, Chief Okeke, watched him with a mixture of pride and concern. Being the only boy, his sisters treated him like a fragile egg that must never crack. "Chika, sit down, I will bring your food," Adis would insist. "Give me your clothes, I will wash them," Obianuju would say before he even asked. If anyone dared raise their voice at him, Chidinma and Somto would stand like soldiers. "Do not speak to our brother like that," they would protest fiercely. Chika grew up surrounded by rappers, laughter, and constant protection. He did not struggle for attention, attention chased him. And while Amarachi was being molded by discipline and responsibility, Chika was being cushioned by affection so thick that it softened his edges. 2 different homes. 2 different trainings. Destiny was quietly preparing to bring them together. From the time Chika could sit upright without falling, he found more comfort among rappers than among walking sticks. While other boys his age gathered around their fathers to listen to stories of strength and lineage, Chika preferred the warm, smoky kitchen where the women laughed freely and stirred pots of soup thick with aroma. He would squat beside Mama Uchechi, fanning the fire gently, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Mama, add more pepper," he would suggest playfully, tasting from the wooden spoon before she could stop him. His sisters would burst into laughter. "See our brother. He thinks he is the head cook." Adis would tease, tapping his shoulder. He enjoyed their gossip, their soft chatter about neighbors, marriages, market prices, and village news. Nothing escaped his ears, and nothing in his own life escaped his mother's. Every small detail, he carried straight to her. "Mama, today Obina argued with me." "Mama, I think I had a strange dream." "Mama, do you think I spoke well?" Even his dreams belonged to her. Even his misunderstandings with friends were laid at her feet for interpretation. If a girl smiled at him, Mama knew. If someone insulted him, Mama knew before sunset. It was as though his thoughts passed through her before they were allowed to rest in his own mind. But Chief Okeke watched all of this with tightening lips and growing irritation. A stern and traditional man, he believed the son must learn from men, not hide under the comfort of women's laughter. Many evenings, his deep voice would cut across the compound. "Chika, come here." Reluctantly, Chika would drag his feet to his father's hut, leaving behind the rhythm of stirring spoons and bubbling pots. Chief Okeke would sit upright, his walking stick resting beside him. "Why are you always in the kitchen?" he would demand. "A man must sit where men sit. You must learn how to speak, how to decide, how to lead." He would gesture toward the open space outside. "Go and sit with the men. Listen when they talk. Learn responsibility." Sometimes his voice softened, almost pleading. "My son, the world will not treat you like your sisters do." Chika would nod obediently, murmuring, "Yes, Papa." But the moment his father's eyes turned away, he would slip quietly back toward the women's hut, drawn again to the comfort of familiar voices. The sound of laughter would welcome him like a returning hero. Mama Uchechi would smile proudly, making space for him beside her. And Chief Okeke, watching from a distance, would shake his head slowly, knowing that a boy who refuses to leave the kitchen may one day struggle to stand alone. The day Chika announced he was ready for marriage, he did not stand like a man who had searched his heart and chosen a woman. He stood like a boy making a request for new sandals. He walked into his mother's hut in the late afternoon, where Mama Uchechi was sorting dried pepper, and cleared his throat softly. "Mama," he began, shifting his weight from one foot to another. I think I am ready to marry. Mama Uchechi looked up slowly, her eyes widening before melting into satisfaction. A hen. My son is now a man, she teased gently. Chica nodded, almost shyly. Yes, Mama. So, find me a wife. He said it simply, without hesitation, without embarrassment, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Mama Uchechi's lips curved into a proud smile. Her only son still trusted her to choose for him. Her only son still depended on her. Deep inside her heart, a quiet thought settled comfortably: I will find him a wife who knows her place. A wife who will not drag him away from me. A wife who will respect my voice. She did not want a woman who would compete with her influence, she wanted one who would blend into it. Days later, she saw Amarachi at a gathering, standing beside her mother Neka, greeting elders with grace. Her skin glowed like fresh palm oil beneath the sun, her posture straight, her eyes calm and respectful. Women whispered good things about her. Men lowered their voices in admiration. Mama Uchechi observed quietly and thought, this one will bring respect. This one will not disgrace my house. Negotiations began soon after, elders moving back and forth with careful words and measured smiles. When Amarachi was told about Chica, she felt curiosity rise in her chest. The first time they met, it was brief but unforgettable. Their eyes locked for a suspended moment that felt longer than it was. Chica's gaze was soft, almost timid, and he smiled nervously. You are welcome, he said gently. Amarachi felt her heartbeat quicken. There was something about his quietness that felt safe. Something about his calmness that felt tender. She saw gentleness in him. She saw a man who would never shout, never raise his hand, never speak harshly. What she did not see was the cord of dependence tied tightly between him and his mother. What she mistook for kindness was his inability to stand alone. And as she lowered her eyes shyly, love blooming faster than wisdom, destiny sealed its decision. The wedding day arrived in a burst of color and celebration, wrappers shimmering under the sun, beads clinking softly against glowing skin, laughter rising like birds into the sky. Drums spoke boldly, flutes answered sweetly, and feet moved in joyful rhythm across the compound. Women ululated with pride while men nodded in approval. Amarachi glowed as a bride, her skin radiant, her eyes lowered modestly yet shining with quiet excitement. She moved gracefully among the elders, greeting them with humility, her smile soft and pure. May your home be blessed, the women prayed over her. May your womb be fruitful, another added, placing a gentle hand on her head. Chief Okeke stood at a distance, observing his son carefully. His face carried celebration, but behind it flickered something else, unease. He watched the way Chika lingered too long beside his mother, the way Mama Uchechi adjusted his collar repeatedly, whispering into his ear as though sending him to battle instead of marriage. The music continued late into the evening until exhaustion slowly replaced excitement. One by one, the guests drifted home. The drums fell silent. The compound settled into stillness. Inside the hut prepared for them, Amarachi sat shyly on the edge of the bed, her wrapper wrapped firmly around her, heart pounding like a distant drum. This was the moment she had imagined quietly in her girlhood, the beginning of her own home. Chika paced the small room, clearing his throat, adjusting his wrapper, glancing at her and then looking away. The silence stretched awkwardly. Amarachi lowered her eyes, waiting for him to speak, her cheeks warm with anticipation. Suddenly, Chika stopped pacing. He stood upright as if struck by a thought. Wait here, he said quickly, almost urgently. Let me go and ask Mama something. Amarachi blinked, unsure she heard correctly. Ask Mama, what? She whispered, confusion clouding her soft voice. But Chika was already moving toward the door. His steps hurried and determined. Before she could form another word, Before she could gather her scattered thoughts, he slipped out into the night, leaving her frozen on the bed, staring at the empty doorway, her heart no longer pounding from excitement, but from shock. Chika hurried into his mother's hut like a boy carrying urgent news, his breathing uneven, his eyes shining with nervous excitement. "Mama," he whispered, bending close so no one else would hear, "it is time." Mama Uchechi looked up at him without surprise, as though she had been expecting the moment. "Calm down," she said softly, adjusting her wrapper. "Why are you shaking like this?" Chika swallowed. "Mama, what should I do?" The question came out in a rush, innocent and sincere. Mama Uchechi lowered her voice and began to speak to him carefully, step by step, like she was teaching him how to prepare a delicate soup that must not spoil. "First, speak gently. Do not rush. A woman is not firewood you throw into flame. Be patient. Do this, then do that," she gestured calmly with her hands, explaining with seriousness and precision. Chika listened attentively, nodding after every sentence. "Yes, Mama. I understand, Mama." His face was focused, almost determined, as though memorizing instructions for an examination. When she finished, she patted his shoulder proudly. "Go now. And remember what I said." He nodded one final time and hurried back into the night. Inside the hut, Amarachi still sat on the bed, confusion mixing with disbelief. When the door opened and Chika stepped in, she searched his face for explanation. He avoided her eyes at first, then cleared his throat confidently, standing straighter than before. "Okay," he said awkwardly, trying to sound composed. "I know what to do now." Amarachi's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She did not know whether to laugh or cry. The entire situation felt unreal, funny in its innocence, painful in its meaning. Chika behaved with a strange mixture of nervousness and pride, carefully following instructions he dared not forget. The moment was clumsy, tender, almost childlike, yet beneath it lay something Amarachi could not yet name. When morning finally came and the first light slipped into the hut, Chika did not linger. He sprang up with excitement written boldly on his face. "Mama," he called even before reaching her door. "Mama." Mama Uchechi stepped out, adjusting her wrapper calmly, but her eyes sparkled with anticipation. "What is it?" she asked, though she already knew. Chika grinned widely, speaking loudly without restraint. "Mama, it was good. I was happy. Everything you said worked." His joy overflowed shamelessly, like a boy who had passed his first test. Mama Uchechi beamed with deep satisfaction, pride swelling in her chest as though she herself had accomplished something great. "I told you," she replied warmly. "Did I not teach you well?" Behind the thin wall of the hut, Amarachi stood still. She had woken early, intending to step outside quietly, but her feet refused to move when she heard her husband's voice carrying every detail into another woman's ears. Her smile, the one she had worn since the wedding day, faded just slightly for the first time. Not completely gone, but no longer as bright. And in that small fading, something important began to shift. It began with something small, something simple, something every new bride should be able to ask without fear. One quiet afternoon, Amarachi folded her worn wrappers carefully and turned to Chika with a gentle smile. "My husband," she said softly, "these clothes are becoming old. I would like to buy new ones." Chika did not even pause to consider her request. He stood up immediately, dusting his hands. "Let me go and ask Mama," he replied casually, as if that was the natural order of things. Amarachi's smile froze slightly. "Ask Mama," she repeated under her breath, but he was already walking quickly toward his mother's hut. She remained where she was, staring at the doorway he had just passed through, her heart heavy with something she could not yet describe. Minutes later, he returned, his face neutral, his tone final. "Mama said no. She said the ones you have are still strong." Amarachi nodded slowly. "Oh. I see." She forced a faint smile, folding the same old wrappers again, swallowing the sting rising in her throat. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself peace was more important than pride. But inside, something shifted quietly. Then came the market incident. That morning, the kitchen shelves were nearly empty. Amarachi approached him once more, her voice respectful. "Chika, I need money to go to the market. There are things we must buy." Without hesitation, he responded the same way. "Wait. Let me ask Mama." This time, Amarachi did not even try to hide the sadness in her eyes as he hurried away. From where she stood, she could hear faint murmurs from his mother's hut. Then footsteps returning. He entered, looking almost apologetic but not enough. "Mama said no," he announced. "She said you can manage what is there." Amarachi stared at him, disbelief washing over her slowly. "Manage?" she asked quietly. "Chika, this is our home." He shrugged lightly. "Mama knows best." In that moment, standing in the house she was supposed to call her own, Amarachi felt like a visitor seeking permission to exist. Like a guest whose request required approval from another woman. Word of these happenings eventually reached Chief Okeke, and the news ignited something fierce in him. He stormed into his wife's hut, his voice shaking with anger. "Uchechi," he called sharply. "What is this I am hearing?" Mama Uchechi looked up calmly. "What have you heard?" she asked, unbothered. "You are refusing your son's wife money. You are deciding what he buys for her." His voice thundered across the compound. "You are raising a husband for yourself, not for his wife." The words hung heavily in the air. Mama Uchechi scoffed softly, waving her hand dismissively. "I am only guiding my son. There is nothing wrong in that." Chief Okeke's jaw tightened. "Guide him, yes. Control his marriage, no." But Mama Uchechi simply turned away, refusing to see the danger growing quietly inside the walls of her son's home, while Amarachi stood alone, learning painfully that love without independence can feel like imprisonment. The mockery did not begin loudly, it started in whispers wrapped in laughter. Adis would glance at Obianuju and smile knowingly whenever Amarachi spoke. "Our brother's wife is still learning," Adis would say with a tone sweet enough to sting. Obianuju would add, "In this house, we respect Mama first. If you respect her, everything will be easy for you." Amarachi would lower her eyes politely. "I respect Mama," she would reply softly. But they would exchange looks again, unconvinced. "Then show it," Obianuju would press gently. "Do not try to take our brother away from the woman who raised him." Their words were coated with smiles, yet sharp underneath. Slowly, Amarachi began to feel like air was thinning around her. Every movement observed. Every word measured. Every request judged. She felt suffocated in a home that was supposed to be hers. Then came the family gathering that sealed the wound. Relatives filled the compound, laughter rising and falling like restless waves. Food was served, drinks passed around, conversations overlapping. Amarachi moved carefully, ensuring everyone was comfortable. At one point, she spoke lightly, suggesting something about how things should be arranged. It was a small comment, harmless, natural for a wife managing her home. But across the gathering, Mama Uchechi's eyes narrowed slightly. She did not speak. She did not interrupt. She only lifted her chin and gave Chika a subtle signal. Chika saw it. And without hesitation, he cleared his throat. "No," he said firmly, cutting Amarachi off. "That is not how we do things here." The chatter quieted slightly. All eyes turned toward them. Amarachi blinked, confused. "I was only suggesting," she began gently. Chika interrupted again, louder this time. "Mama said it should be done differently." The humiliation burned hot and immediate, crawling up her neck to her face. Laughter resumed, but softer now, curious. Adi smirked faintly. Obianuju shook her head as if disappointed. Amarachi forced a small smile and stepped back, swallowing the embarrassment. She said nothing more for the rest of the gathering. But inside her, something trembled. Her spirit shook, not from anger, but from the realization that her voice carried no weight in her own marriage. That night, when the house finally grew quiet, she turned to Chika, her eyes heavy with restrained tears. "Chika," she asked softly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her, "am I your wife or your mother's visitor?" He stiffened immediately, defensive. "Why are you talking like that?" he snapped lightly. "Mama only wants the best for us." Amarachi held his gaze, her heart aching. "And what about what I want?" she whispered. But he turned away, unwilling to see the wound he had just deepened, while she lay awake beside him, suffocating in silence. That night, after Chika had turned his back and drifted into restless sleep, Amarachi lay still beside him, her eyes wide open in the darkness. The silence pressed against her chest until it became too heavy to carry. Slowly, carefully, she rose from the bed and stepped outside, wrapping her cloth tightly around herself as if to hold together the pieces of her breaking heart. Under the quiet sky, she allowed the tears to fall. Not loud sobs, not dramatic cries, just steady, aching tears that slipped down her cheeks and dropped onto the earth beneath her feet. "Is this marriage?" she whispered to herself. "Is this what I prayed for?" The memories of her parents' voices returned to her like distant echoes. She could see her father, Izudu, seated firmly, his voice calm but serious. "My daughter," he had once said, "a man must stand on his own feet. Do not marry a man who hides behind another's shadow." Her mother, Neka, had added gently, "Kindness is good, but weakness is dangerous in a husband." At the time, she had smiled, confident in her choice. She had seen gentleness in Chika and believed it was strength under control. Now, standing alone in the quiet compound, she understood the difference. "I thought I married a man," she murmured through trembling lips, "but I married a child seeking permission to breathe." The tears came harder then, but even as they fell, something inside her began to harden, not bitterness, not hatred, but clarity. She wiped her face slowly. Silence, she realized, was no longer strength. Enduring humiliation quietly was not virtue, it was slow destruction. She could not keep shrinking herself to fit inside a space where she was not allowed to exist fully. By morning, her decision was made. There was no shouting. No insult. No public confrontation. She did not wake Chika with anger. She simply folded her clothes carefully, placed them into a small bag, and looked around the room one last time. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of disappointment. When Chika stirred and saw her tying her wrapper firmly, confusion crossed his face. "Where are you going?" he asked sleepily. Amarachi did not raise her voice. "I am going home," she replied quietly. "Home? What do you mean?" His tone sharpened slightly. She met his eyes, steady and composed. "Until you decide to become a husband, I cannot remain here as a visitor." He stared at her, stunned, but she did not wait for argument. Without drama, without tears in front of him, she stepped out of the hut, walked past the compound that never truly felt like hers, and began the journey back to Izudu's house, carrying not just a small bag in her hand, but the heavy truth that love without respect is a prison no woman should accept. When Chika returned that evening, he called out casually, "Amarachi," expecting her soft voice to answer from the kitchen. There was no reply. He stepped inside the hut and paused. The room felt different, too neat, too still. He noticed the small space where her clothes had once been folded. Empty. His chest tightened slightly. "Amarachi," he called again, louder this time. Still nothing. He walked toward the kitchen area. The pot sat on the firewood, but the fire had long died. He lifted the lid slowly. The food inside was cold. Untouched. The silence in the house was not ordinary silence, it was heavy, pressing against his ears, swallowing even the sound of his own breathing. For the first time since his marriage, the house did not feel supervised or guided. It felt abandoned. Panic rose in him like sudden heat. Without thinking, he rushed toward his mother's hut. "Mama," he called, his voice already shaking. Mama Uchechi looked up from where she sat there. "What is it?" she asked calmly. Chika's eyes were wide, confused, almost afraid. "She is not there. Amarachi is not there." Mama frowned slightly. "What do you mean she is not there?" "Her things are gone. The house is empty." His voice broke then, the realization finally settling in. He dropped to sit beside her like a frightened boy. "Mama, she has left." The word sounded strange even to him. Mama Uchechi clicked her tongue softly and pulled him closer, patting his back as though comforting a child who had lost his toy. "Calm down," she said gently. "She will return. Be patient." Chika wiped his face with the back of his hand, breathing unevenly. "But why would she go?" he asked helplessly. Mama Uchechi shook her head dismissively. "Women do that sometimes. She will come back when she finishes being angry." He nodded weakly, clinging to her assurance like a lifeline. Days passed. 1 week. No Amarachi. The compound felt unusually quiet. Adis and Obianuju were busy with their own responsibilities, no longer hovering around him the way they used to. The sisters who once filled the kitchen with chatter were now occupied with their own lives. The kitchen itself felt empty without Amarachi's steady movements, without the rhythm of her grinding stone at dawn, without the soft humming that used to drift through the air. Chika found himself standing in the doorway one morning, listening for a sound that never came. He began to notice the absence of small things, the way she adjusted his wrapper without being asked, the way she gently corrected him when he spoke too quickly, the warmth of her laughter that softened the edges of his day. Even her quiet sighs were now things he missed. The house no longer felt like home, it felt like a space where something important had been removed. And for the first time, Chika understood that patience was not bringing her back. Silence was not fixing anything. Loneliness had entered his house and sat comfortably where his wife once stood. Chika fell to his knees before his father, hands trembling, face buried in his palms, tears spilling unchecked. "Papa," he whispered, voice breaking, "I was wrong. I cannot live without her. I was weak. I let Mama control me too much. I failed." Chief Okeke remained silent, his eyes stern, fixed on his son. The silence stretched, heavy like the midday sun, and Chika felt each second press deeper into his chest. Finally, Chief Okeke spoke, slow, deliberate, his voice like rolling thunder. "A man must choose which voice leads his home," he said, letting the weight of the words sink in. "A husband must be the master of his own decisions. Not his mother's. Not anyone else's. His own." Chika swallowed, nodding through tears, shoulders shaking with the force of his regret. Chief Okeke leaned forward, lowering his tone, yet every word carried iron. "If I see you hiding among rappers again, if I see you letting women guide your life instead of standing as the man of your house, do not call me father. Understand?" "Yes." "Papa," Chika whispered, barely audible, tears streaming freely, "I understand." The decision had been made. Strength had been demanded. Humility had been earned. Chief Okeke rose and signaled the beginning of the journey. A small delegation, elders from both households, followed him as he led Chika toward Izudu's compound. Apologies were offered formally, carefully, words weighed with respect and sincerity. Chika bowed low repeatedly before Amarachi's father. Izudu listened, firm but fair, his voice calm and steady. "You have humbled yourself," he said, "and that is the first step to building a home worth keeping. Let her return if she is willing. Amarachi sat silently, her hands folded in her lap, eyes steady on Chica. She listened to every word, the apologies, the promises, the pledges, but said nothing. She watched the son she had once thought gentle and strong, kneeling not before her, but before truth, before the lesson he had refused to learn. The wind moved softly through the compound, carrying the scent of palm and earth, and in that quiet, unspoken space, a fragile hope began to stir, that perhaps the man who had hidden behind his mother's voice might finally rise and speak for himself. Amarachi returned quietly, her step steady, her head held high, yet her eyes carried the weight of everything she had endured. The moment she entered the compound, Mama Uchechi watched her cautiously, her hands folding and unfolding in her lap, aware that this was a woman changed, no longer a visitor to be guided. Amarachi's gaze swept across the space, taking in the familiar walls, the familiar smells. But this time she saw them as hers, not borrowed. She approached Chika calmly, her voice low but carrying an authority that had been absent before. "Chica," she said, "I married a man. Not a messenger. I will not live in my own home as if I need permission to exist." Her words were simple, yet they struck deep. Chika's chest tightened, the echo of his mother's voice no longer overriding the truth in her tone. Amarachi paused for a moment, letting the words sink. "In this house, I set boundaries. I will speak. I will decide. And I demand independence in my own home." Mama Uchechi shifted slightly, unsure whether to intervene, her eyes wary, her lips pressed into a thin line. Amarachi took a deep breath and asked for something simple, something small, a request any wife might make without fear. "Chica, may I go to the market today?" she asked gently. Chica paused. His eyes met hers, steady, thoughtful. And for the first time, he did not turn toward his mother. He did not hurry to ask permission. He thought, he considered, and then he nodded. "Yes," he said firmly, with a quiet pride, "go. I will go with you if you wish, but it is yours to decide." Amarachi felt a flutter of relief, a spark of joy. The house no longer felt like a cage. She had returned to her own life, her own home, and the man beside her was finally learning to stand, not as a child shadowed by his mother, but as the husband she had always deserved. Days passed, but Mama Uchechi's eyes never left her son's home. She hovered at the edges, offering advice that was no longer asked for, making suggestions that no longer carried weight, sending glances that tried to redirect decisions that Chika now made for himself. One afternoon, as Amarachi prepared the evening meal, Mama stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Chica, perhaps you should ask me before you let her go to the market. I only want what is best." Chica stopped, turning slowly, eyes calm but resolute. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only his mother could hear. "Mama, I love you," he said sincerely, his hands open, showing no threat. "I always will. But this is my home. Amarachi is my wife, and I must decide here." The words struck Mama Uchechi with a force she had not expected. Her lips trembled, and she tried to hold back tears, but they came anyway, slipping silently down her cheeks. Her hands covered her face as though to shield herself from the reality she had long resisted. I raised him," she whispered brokenly, "and now I feel replaced." Chika did not speak further. He waited silently, letting her emotions pass without argument, without insistence, without rushing her to understand. Chief Okeke, who had followed quietly, stepped forward and placed a firm hand on his wife's shoulder. "Uchechi," he said gently but without softening, "you raised the boy, yes. You nurtured him, protected him, guided him. But now, you must allow him to become a man. A husband. A master of his own home. Let him stand, and let her live in the home she has returned to." Mama Uchechi nodded slowly, tears still flowing, the weight of realization heavy in her chest. For the first time, she felt both the pain of letting go and the strange relief of knowing that Chica had finally found the strength to love rightly, to stand beside Amarachi as her husband, not as her mother's messenger. In that quiet, heavy moment, the house breathed again, and the walls seemed to whisper that balance had finally returned. From that day forward, Chica began to change, quietly, steadily. No longer did he linger in the kitchen for hours, laughing and gossiping with the women, seeking constant approval from his mother. Instead, he joined the men in the open compound, sitting among them as they discussed matters of work, land, and village decisions. At first, his movements were hesitant, his voice unsure, but slowly, he learned responsibility. He lifted logs, he carried water. He spoke his mind, he listened without running back to Mama Uchechi for validation. When decisions involved Amarachi, he consulted her privately, kneeling or sitting across from her, listening to her thoughts, weighing them carefully before speaking. "What do you think, my wife?" he would ask sincerely, and she began to realize that her husband was finally standing beside her, not behind his mother. Adiz, Obianuju, Chidinma, and Somto watched cautiously at first. Their laughter became softer when Amarachi spoke. Their whispers quieter. Gradually, they adjusted, learning the new boundaries, learning that Chica was no longer a child to be protected, but a husband with a voice of his own. Tension remained, small pricks of irritation now and then, but growth also bloomed in quiet corners. Even Mama Uchechi, who had once hovered like a shadow over every decision, began to step back. She still loved her son fiercely, her heart still tied to him with invisible cords, but she learned distance. She no longer ran to dictate, no longer insisted on being the arbiter of every choice. She watched him stand as a man, watched him honor Amarachi, and slowly understood that love sometimes required letting go. In the evenings, when the compound settled and the sun sank low, Chica would sit with Amarachi by the fire, speaking softly, making decisions together, laughing lightly, and even when Mama's eyes lingered from afar, the house had changed. It breathed differently now, alive with respect, with independence, with the delicate harmony that only comes when boundaries are honored and hearts are allowed to grow. The first morning Amarachi smiled genuinely again, the sun seemed to linger longer in the sky, as if celebrating the small but profound victory in her heart. She moved through the compound with a lightness that had been absent for months, her laughter returning softly, naturally, not forced, not careful. Chica walked beside her, his arm brushing hers, his voice steady and confident as he spoke up for her, supported her openly in front of the elders and neighbors. "Amarachi speaks wisely," he said one afternoon when a trivial disagreement arose, "and I agree with her." The words were simple, but they carried weight, reverence, and authority. Chief Okeke, standing nearby, nodded slowly, a proud smile hidden beneath his stern gaze. His son had grown, finally standing as a man should, and the pride he felt warmed his chest more than any praise could. In the quiet of that afternoon, as the compound hummed with ordinary life, the lessons lingered like soft wind. A mother's love builds a child, Chief Okeke mama to no one in particular, but it must not cage a man. And as Chica moved with confidence, Amarachi at his side, he knew, marriage is not for boys who still hide in the kitchen. And yet, he also knew, watching her patience bloom into resolve, a woman's patience is deep, but not endless. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Chica turned to Amarachi, his voice low, heartfelt. "Amarachi," he said, "thank you. I am sorry for everything. For my weakness, my hesitation, my foolishness." She looked at him, the heart once buried now replaced with understanding, her eyes soft but clear. "I forgive you, Chica," she replied, fully, without restraint, without reservation. For the first time, the distance between them had vanished. They sat together on the low bench outside the hut, shoulder to shoulder, equal partners in their home, their hands brushing naturally, their hearts aligned. The wind carried the faint scent of palm and firewood, and in that simple moment, the house breathed differently. Love was no longer blind, no longer weighed down by control or fear. It was balanced, strong, tender, and ready to endure.